right, good afternoon, and welcome to our work session of the Wake County Board of Education. It is March 2nd. We are getting started here approximately 3:38. We have all board members here with the exception of Mrs. Kushner, who will be joining us shortly later in the session. But all board members are here, otherwise physically present, along with Superintendent Moore. So we will get started. We've got quite a few items on our agenda. The first is long-range capping recommendations, and that is being brought to us by Wade Martin, Marcella Rory, and Glenn Carrozza. So, Mr. Martin, Superintendent Moore, any opening comments or thoughts from you?
No, this is really the normal time of year that we bring capping recommendations. Might be a week or so later, but we are not expecting any board action this evening. That would come at a later meeting. Go ahead, Wade.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. As Chair Sutton noted, joining me today will be Marcella Rory, our Senior Director for Long Range Planning. Today, staff is bringing to you the recommendation for our school capping that would begin immediately following your approval. And as Superintendent Moore mentioned, we will not be seeking that approval today. And once that is approved, it would continue for the remainder of this school year and through the 21-22 school year. Our capping process includes input from individual school principals, the Office of Student Assignment, Transportation, and long-range planning. As a reminder, enrollment caps do not affect current students enrolled at the school. When a school has an enrollment cap, it means that students who move into the base attendance area after the date the cap is imposed, they may need to attend a designated overflow school, and we'll review that with you today in the presentation. Staff generally brings, as Superintendent Moore mentioned, these recommendations a little bit earlier than we are at this point. But as we've noted throughout the last few months, this school year has been anything but normal. It is also worth mentioning, and I would like to highlight that during our recent enrollment forecast, there were a number of assumptions that we discussed with the board that we will be taking into consideration as we transition into the next school year. Our team will be closely monitoring these assumptions as they will impact individual schools differently. Our school choice team will continue to monitor school enrollments following the opening of the 21-22 school year, and we will bring any necessary updates through the facility committee should we need to alert the board to any individual school concerns regarding their capacity. Ms. Roy, you're muted.
Ms. Rory, are you muted?
Okay. I think I've now found my unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Okay, sorry about that. This is the list of schools that were capped during the 2020-21 school year. Since 2018-19, we have averaged 15 to 18 capped elementary schools, 1 to 2 capped middle schools, and 2 to 3 capped high schools. When determining whether a school should be capped, many factors are considered. We look at whether a school is meeting legislative requirements. We look at whether the school is implementing a new program or anticipating relief due to the opening of a neighboring new or renovated school. We evaluate how a school's core areas are able to support their population for dining, the media center, the gym, etc. We evaluate if a school has exhausted all appropriate means of accommodating their classes without sacrificing the learning environment. We evaluate school sites to determine how many trailers are currently on the campus if the campus has exceeded the trailer limit for that school level, and if more trailers could be accommodated. Per our CIP program assumptions, our goal is to limit the number of trailers at elementary schools to 4 and middle and high schools to 6. Meeting this goal has not always been possible during our years of extreme growth. It is important to remember that it takes a minimum of a year from the time a trailer is requested to when it is moved to the campus and ready to be occupied. We have maintained a line item in the 7-year CIP plan to accommodate trailer moves. We also look at the impact of base student growth increases, since those students would have to be enrolled at that school. As part of our annual forecast update process, we meet with the planners for each municipality. They share data that includes all the projected short-term and long-term residential development, including when they expect those developments to be occupied. When we know that a new residential development is planned in the vicinity of a school, we know these new homes have a potential impact to that school. When schools have already converted significant numbers of classrooms from non-capacity to capacity spaces, it limits the options for accommodating student population growth. At the elementary level, there's less flexibility for assigning classroom spaces. For example, K-1 classrooms must be on the first floor. If a school has K-1 classes in trailers, our goal is to move those classes inside the building. If the school already has multiple classrooms where co-teaching or combined grades is occurring, our goal is to reduce the school's enrollment number so that each class has an independent teaching space. For middle and high schools, our capacity models allow for 26 students per classroom. This is typically not possible, and we average 33 students per classroom. Schools have some flexibility to make changes in teaching space assignments to accommodate student growth. Elementary schools have limited flexibility due to the legislative class size requirements for grades K through 3. For the 2021-22 school year, we must comply with the K-3 class size limit. There is a waiver process to accommodate schools who need to exceed the per classroom limits, but school and district averages must be maintained. Although there is no state mandate for 4th and 5th grade class sizes, our goal is to accommodate between 24 to 26 students each. As shared with the board during our recent enrollment forecast presentation, COVID-19 has increased the unpredictability of school choice and enrollment. While it is easy to predict that we will enroll the majority of Wake County students in the Wake County public school system, understanding the impact of other factors is more challenging. The district is working through our instructional delivery recommendations for the 2021-22 school year. In order to provide as much flexibility as possible, we recommend that all currently capped schools retain their enrollment caps for the upcoming year. We have approached this process assuming that at some time during the 2021-22 school year, all students will return to campus. When making capping recommendations, we look at the crowding in the brick and mortar building combined with the trailers on site. As we work through the capping factors and considerations with the principals, transportation, and the Office of Student Assignment, we are recommending that Northwoods Elementary, Zebulon Elementary, Apex Friendship Middle, and Apex Friendship High be capped. Northwoods Elementary has received additional trailers that are scheduled to be operational this fall. This will allow the school to move classes into independent program teaching spaces. the school cannot support increased enrollment and keep classes in the independent program teaching spaces. Zebulon Elementary has a total of 10 trailers and cannot support additional units. The municipality and our forecast consultants expect the area to experience a 3% growth rate annualized over the next 10 years. This growth will impact this school. Apex Friendship Middle is now in its third year of operation. With the continued growth in this area, we are expecting the school to soon reach the same level of crowding as the high school. Apex Friendship High is now in its 6th year of operation and has far exceeded the anticipated capacity. There are additional new subdivisions that are planned near the 3-school campus, which will continue to exacerbate the extreme growth in the area. The school will see some relief when the new Felton Grove High School, H12, opens in the 2024-25 school year, but we feel strongly that this school needs to be capped at this time. As part of the capping recommendation process, we also recommend overflow schools to enroll the additional students. Similar to the considerations and factors that are evaluated for capping recommendations, we consider those same factors for the overflow schools. We also must consider transportation needs and bell schedules as part of this process for both the capped and overflow schools. We are recommending Cary Elementary as the overflow for Northwoods Elementary. We are recommending Wakeland Elementary as the overflow for Zebulon Elementary. We are recommending Apex Middle for Apex Friendship Middle School. And we are recommending Apex High for Apex Friendship High School. There are 3 options that can be considered as part of the growth management process. 1, we can cap schools after evaluating proximate schools to determine if there is available capacity. Also, would the change allow for capped out students to return to base? Capping is no longer a viable short-term solution. Number 2, we can evaluate if a school calendar change would allow us to realize additional capacity, what the impact would be to the school's base. Would a calendar change help us avoid significant reassignments? And what is the area's growth going forward? Would the change allow for long-term stability for the community? Lastly, we would look at whether we need to reassign students. Our transportation team works to ensure that the bus runs are as tight as possible. This reduces the amount of time that students are on buses and also reduces cost. There's typically more flexibility in the mornings because you can move the start times up, but there is little to no flexibility with the 2nd and 3rd tier routes. During a standard school year, bus ridership changes due to other factors, including parent choice. During the pandemic, bus ridership has been in a state of flux. Prior to the pandemic, we supported a total of 756 buses on 3 tiers across the county. For the purposes of determining how many buses will be needed during the 2021-22 school year, we have assumed that at some point everyone would be back on campus. Therefore, we have used the 2019-2020 bus ridership data as a starting point to predict what the impact will be on our number of buses for 2021-22. In a non-pandemic year, there are always challenges with hiring enough drivers, and we expect that challenge to continue.
In summary, staff recommends maintaining all existing school caps and adding the 4 additional schools as Ms. Roy just outlined: Northwoods Elementary School, Zebulon Elementary School, Apex Friendship Middle School, and Apex Friendship High School. Here again, it is worth mentioning that important point that myself and Ms. Rory highlighted, and that really is the number of assumptions that we are monitoring closely as we transition into next school year regarding our school enrollments. Our team will be closely monitoring these assumptions as they, again, will impact individual schools differently based on growth in different areas of the county. As our school choice team continues to monitor these enrollments, we will bring any updates to the facility committee should we need to alert the board. Staff welcomes questions and input today from the board. We do plan to bring a final recommendation for your approval to the next meeting on March 16th. Thank you, and at this time, we will open up the presentation for dialogue and questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Martin and Mrs. Rory. So I'll entertain any questions from the board. I'll start with Vice Chairman Haffey.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and thank you for bringing these to us, Mr. Martin and Ms. Rory. I have 3 questions. The first one is a clarifying question. Initially, it was the cap goes into effect on the date that the cap is proposed. I assume it means adopted by the board, meaning March 16th, or is that today that the cap goes into effect?
That would be following board approval,
Okay.
which we hope to bring on the 16th.
Okay, since this is a work session, I know we have a lot of folks watching. I wanted to make sure that we were clear with that because capping can be a little bit anxiety inducing for our new families. So this was kind of answered in the presentation of the choice to not lower the caps at any of the schools, specifically the elementary schools. Ms. Rory, you stated as much flexibility as possible. If you or Mr. Martin could kind of talk a little bit more about what that means going into this next school year. The reason not to lower the caps.
You mean, I'm sorry, just to clarify, you're asking for clarification on why we recommend not removing any of the caps?
No, I'm sorry. Not lowering any of the capping numbers for any of our schools that are currently capped.
Well, in order to provide as much flexibility as we possibly can, we don't think it would be wise to change that number at this time.
Okay.
We understand that there are a certain number of students that are in virtual academy at this point, but as Mr. Martin mentioned, there are quite a few assumptions we had to make. And because we're still working out the plans for how we'll enter into the 2021-22 school year, we didn't think that making yet another change in that process would be beneficial at this time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And my final question has to do with a specific, the overflow school recommendation for Apex Friendship Middle. Apex Middle, as you know, is a very tight site, and we recently took the cap off of that school. I know that you're working with transportation, and I'm sure you've looked at either splitting it with Holly Ridge or I'd be more interested in hearing more about the choice for Apex Middle to be the overflow school alone for Apex Friendship Middle, because 102.9 is about where we were when that school was capped.
Certainly. Thank you, Ms. Happy. We had many conversations with our transportation department, and initially we actually had 2 schools that we were going to recommend as potential overflow schools. However, it creates a lot of challenges for transportation when there's more than one option. So their request for us, after we sat and looked at all the routes, we looked at what number of buses would be required, and also the distance and the amount of time that students would be on campus. And pardon me, they're cutting grass literally right outside the window. I apologize. But after going through and evaluating all of those points, we decided that it would be better to recommend just simply one school. So for Apex Middle School, one of the things to keep in mind is that it is a slightly older school, and we expect to be able to realize some additional capacity if needed as we change some of the uses of some spaces within that building.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you for the information. And I also appreciate the section that discusses options when we do have crowded schools. Specifically, do we look at converting schools to multi-track year-round? I know that's something the board has been asked and has been the center of many discussions. So I appreciate seeing that as a reminder to the community that these are our options with crowded schools. So I appreciate that. When looking at Zebulon Elementary School and understanding that it is crowded, I do have a few concerns about capping that school. It is a magnet school, and I think that makes kind of a unique situation where we could be, if a family moves into an area, this does definitely have different programming for base students because it is an equity magnet designed to retain base student population. That's something that concerns me. What would happen to this school and its magnet program, to its function as a magnet program? So I wanted to address that. That's a concern of mine. Capping our schools in the eastern area has sometimes I think has unintended negative consequences where families are seeking stability. Of course, we understand that throughout the county, but I'm a little concerned about that one. I would ask for either some detailed information about how the space is used within the school and within the trailers, the programming and the number of students, or even potentially ask if we could take that off for one more year and revisit it again next year.
I'm sorry, would you like for me to comment, Ms. Scott?
Well, I do think that what we're getting is a request from Board Member Scott to take a look at the numbers again, provide a greater explanation and/or a potentially revised recommendation delaying this for a year, depending on what we find. So I think staff will need to be prepared to update that information pending whatever recommendation we bring next week.
Certainly. Thank you.
So, okay. Mrs. Cash?
Yeah, so on slide 9, first of all, I think we need to be very careful about putting additional caps, especially on, like, I think the magnet school at Zebulon. That was a concern to me as far as and also the Apex Friendship Middle, because I think if we cause any repercussions on that, and again, capping is not very efficient for this Board of Education, and I know we tend to stay away from reassigning students, but again, I think we've also shied away from how we're going to convert schools to multi-track versus reassignment versus capping, and I think we need to deal with that quickly and not put that off any longer, because I think capping's I think it's just a bad idea. I want to ask a quick question. This board has a lot of bruises based on capacity numbers, and the parents out there in all of our schools know our capacity numbers from last year and the year before and how we've reassigned. And so I guess as one board member, I'm trying to understand, is the capacity numbers that we are looking at today very different from the capacity numbers that we looked at last year? And if so, I just need to know what that might be.
Ms. Cash, this is Mr. Martin. When you say the capacity numbers, are you referring to the numbers shared regarding the 4 specific new schools or all of the schools? And I'm happy to address either question, and I certainly can speak to that.
Say that question again.
Are you wanting updated information on just the 4 schools that we are bringing as a recommendation, or just in general in terms of the facility?
No, actually in general, for the
schools?
table that we received that was also connected to this presentation.
Okay.
That's a whole new capacity numbers, and I actually have not compared those, but I will, maybe. And so I'm trying to see how different they are, because I can tell you our constituents are going to remember our capacity numbers from last year. And if they're different, I just need to know why.
Most certainly. And I think one of the things I would start with is you may recall back in September, Ms. Rory and I provided the board with an update following the PMR2 regarding this year's 2021 facility utilization. And there were some adjustments that board members had questions in terms of individual schools. One of the factors that we took into account this year as we moved into that process was updating some of what is termed as utilization capacity. So for example, and I'll use one example, when a new school is built, for example, like Apex Friendship Middle School, certain spaces are identified as instructional classrooms, like a 6th, 7th, or 8th grade class. And then there may be some spaces that are identified specifically for certain elective classes. So when Mr. Carosa does the assignment plan and identifies the capacity for a respective new school like Apex Friendship Middle School, it only calculates the actual instructional spaces identified for those core classes. So a special ed classroom, for example, which is a support service, is not calculated in that school's capacity number. However, as we know, every school community is a little bit different. So in the case, for example, with Apex Friendship Middle School, if they are using an identified space like a special ed classroom for a 6th grade language arts class, then that class, the numbers that is built into that capacity. So in the transition between Ms. Lighthall, who was our previous long-range planner, and Ms. Rory, we've updated that model to provide this current utilization summary. So in some cases, you did see some changes from the 2019 year to 2020. Moving forward, that will be much more stable, as we were simply trying to provide the board with an accurate utilization capacity for each building.
Okay, so if I ask you why the capacity at this school was different last year, but from this year, you could probably tell me what different classrooms were taken into consideration this year that we have not done in the past, which I actually thought we were trying to do the best we could, but because there's going to be some questions out there, I guarantee you, this year on why we reassigned last year based on capacity numbers. But I think I can get an answer from your department, school by school, probably.
That is exactly correct. And one of the things that was one of the first tasks that Ms. Roy took on this year in her new role was to identify by school, working with each school principal, how that building capacity in terms of utilization was happening. So we've got very accurate, up-to-date data around that exact question. One of the things I would also share is that we plan to create a facility utilization committee. And on that committee, it would include Mr. Carosa with student assignment, myself, Ms. Rory, and representatives from special ed department, our pre-K programs, as well as some individual school principals, to establish some guidelines so that we can have consistency across the district in terms of how decisions are made by school principals around using the respective spaces in their building. And I think that will bring a lot more consistency so that we can communicate with the board and the public in a more consistent manner.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. A few quick questions. I do want to follow up on Ms. Cash's question, and it might be as simple as this. We throw around a couple terms and use them interchangeably when they might be different things. Ms. Cash in her question was asking about school capacity, but then we make recommendations based on utilization. And to me, it seems like capacity is the number of students a facility can that can occupy the facility, that it can handle, whereas utilization is more based on the choice of the individual administrator in the school on how they've allocated classroom space. So is that something that maybe we could get a little more explanation or a little more, guidance on at a future meeting when you bring these numbers back or when we look at the next facilities utilization report?
Mr. Hagerty, that was a great question and that actually a great segue. Ms. Rory and I do plan to come back to the board next month to talk about the proposed facility utilization for the next school year. At that point, we'll have projected numbers for next year based on current enrollments and current kindergarten registrations as they're developing, and we'll be having that in-depth conversation with the board. We're hopeful that our committee we'll have some initial preliminary recommendations that we can share and get some input from the board. So that exact comment that you just identified, we'll be bringing that to you next month.
Okay, thank you. Also, I was pleased Ms. Roy had mentioned some of the work that you do going out and meeting with local governments and their planners. I was curious how often that takes place. Is that like annually, semi-annually, more frequently?
It's done annually. Thank you, Mr. Hagerty. It's done annually as part of our enrollment forecast process.
Okay, so I want to assure folks, for example, if a town changes their land use plan or maybe changes what might be on the horizon, but it takes place a little while after you've had your annual check-in, you do note that, right? And you do make adjustments. It's not that you only look at these numbers annually.
That would be correct. And actually, we are constantly communicated with from the municipalities anytime anything changes, because what we're looking at is anything from short term up to about 7 years, and then long term up to about 20 years. But if a developer purchases a piece of property and decides to put 500 single family homes on it, then typically we get an email from that municipality saying, this was not part of our plan, but this is what we're looking at. We need to make you aware, and so forth and so on. So there is back and forth communication, but the official process is annually.
Great, thank you. And then just one final question. As we talk about capping, one of the questions we hear most frequently from constituents and parents across the county has to deal with if they are in a capped, if they do live in the base area for a capped school, there's confusion about the waiting list policy. I know we have some schools that are capped that, according to the worksheet right now, don't actually have any students capped out, and then there's some that have, I see Olive Chapel with 279 students capped out. I know Hortons Creek has over 200 capped out. So where students are capped, where families are capped out, there's questions about what their place is on the waiting list. Is it the time of their residency, and is that impacted if they decide to go for a magnet school, for example? Can they, do they lose their place in line? Or if they leave the system to go to a charter or private or homeschooling, maybe now during the pandemic, do they lose their place in line on the waiting list, or is it always based upon their date of residency?
Mr. Hagerty, that's a great question. And with us this afternoon is Mr. Carosa, and I know his team works closely with the school data managers that really work to manage that overflow list. And at this point, I would welcome Mr. Carosa to respond to that question, because I think he can provide a little more detail for you as his team works directly with the schools on those lists.
Thank you. So, Mr. Hagerty, students remain on the CAP school wait list as long as they're enrolled in Wake County schools. families are placed on a wait list and have the ability to pre-register for the upcoming school year. Anyone who does so prior to April 1st and can prove that they've lived in that base attendance area prior to the cap date, they would be eligible to attend the school. Anyone who does not meet that criteria or enrolls after April 1st would be placed on a wait list. Applying to magnets, transferring to other schools does not affect a CAP student's wait list position. And so therefore, we always give them that option. Should a seat become available at their first choice, their base school, they always have that option. When a seat becomes available, we'll contact parents, ask them if they would like to transfer back to the base. If they decline at that time, they would then be removed completely from the wait list. And then therefore, they can start the process again for the next year by requesting a transfer back to base and then be placed on the wait list again.
Perfect. I appreciate that, Mr. Carrozza. And so just last question on that for clarification. If a family has multiple siblings and one leaves the system, but one remains, do they maintain their place, their place on the waiting list at the base school, or is it only for the student that remains in the system, and once a student leaves, they've kind of given up their place in line?
So we always treat students separately. And so if a seat becomes available for a second grade child, but not the fourth grade sibling, let's say, we will invite the second grade child to come back to their seat with the understanding that we do not have seats for both children. But then the parent has the choice to decline that seat and wait for a seat for both children, but we will not penalize the child we invited back. We will just leave them at the top of the wait list.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions from board members? All right, Mr. Martin, Ms. Rory, thank you for that update and those recommendations. Board members, as you've heard, we will hear these recommendations will come before the board at our next meeting on the 16th, and staff will be seeking board approval at that time.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Sutton.
All right, next up on our agenda is the 2021-22 instructional calendars for a number of our schools. I think these are all early colleges.
These are our early colleges, and then Knightdale High School that has a partnership with Wake Tech.
Yeah, I saw Knightdale in there, so I wasn't sure if that was just our early colleges or what. All right, I think that's also Mr. Martin and Tamani Anderson Powell.
That is, thank you, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. Today, we bring you the last of our proposed 21-22 instructional calendars for your consideration. As Chair Sutton identified, with me is Tamani Anderson Powell, a director in our Magnet and Curriculum Enhancement Office. The 21-22 instructional calendars for Knightdale High School, North Wake College and Career Academy, Vernon Malone College and Career Academy, Wake STEM Early College, Wake Early College Health Science, and our Wake Leadership Academies all contain 177 student days and at least the required 1,025 instructional hours. All of the draft calendars also meet all other requirements of our current calendar law. Staff will bring back these calendars for final approval to the next meeting on March 16th. Ms. Anderson Powell will share briefly with the board how these calendars are developed with our respective school principals, college and university partners, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding these draft calendars. Ms. Anderson Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, and good evening, good afternoon, board members. Typically, these calendars are created, the administration at the early college works directly with their university partner to create the calendar. I give them a blank template and make sure that the days that the state requires, like state holidays or required vacation days, are on the calendar, and then they work within those parameters. But the administration at each school works directly with their university partner to create the calendar. I kind of vet the calendar when it comes back to be sure, again, that it meets state law. And then here we are presenting them to you today.
Just as one quick reminder, these always come after other calendars because we do have to work for the university or community college to set their academic calendar before we can engage.
Thank you for that, Superintendent Moore. And at this point, we are welcome to answer any questions that the board may have about the draft calendars that we've shared.
Any questions from board members regarding these instructional calendars? Dr. Martin.
Just a minor comment, but I think it may be important to note for the public. Is it when you look at all these different calendars, there's where the work days are different, and there's a lot more variance than what one might normally expect. But is it correct that this is largely for alignment with their partner schools, the college, the university, the Wake Tech, et cetera?
Dr. Martin, that is correct. I'm sorry. Often they will align their teacher work days maybe during the spring break of the university partner. And so those days will look different on these early college calendars as they align with the calendar of their college and university partner.
Thank you. I just thought that was a point that was worth emphasizing, particularly given many of the early colleges are in my district. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin.
Mrs. Scott.
I don't have a question so much as a comment. I just wanted to thank you all for this work. It always amazes me, and I'm incredibly thankful for the partnerships that we do have with Wake Tech. This is such a great opportunity for our students at these schools, and I just wanted to extend my gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
Any other thoughts or questions from board members? All right. I think on these we will be approving these calendars as well at our March 16th meeting.
That is correct, Chair Sutton, and thank you for your time and input today.
All right. Thank you all for bringing those to us. All right, moving on with our agenda, the next item is the 2021-22 kindergarten entry and homeschool students. I think this is an update on some of the data around those numbers or policies and procedures.
We've had staff has been working with principals, and we've had a couple of board members as registrations are coming up for kindergarten and that sort of thing. Thought this is a really good time to explain exactly how we're approaching next year, given the impact in particular for kindergarten this past year. So turn it over to Drew, Sarita, and Crystal.
Yep. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and members of the board. As Superintendent Moore just referenced, kind of continuing with the theme of planning and preparations for 2021-22, in our last work session 2 weeks ago, you may recall that one of several key areas of focus for our next school year planning efforts that we referenced was a continuous review of existing policies and procedures to ensure that our practices are aligned to best meet the needs of our students and community, covering a wide range of areas and given the ever kind of changing circumstances that we're in. We do appreciate the opportunity this afternoon to provide you with an update on one of those areas, in this case, how the district makes 21-22 placement decisions for some of our youngest students. Specifically, today we'll talk about those students that may be eligible for kindergarten who are not currently enrolled in the Wake County Public School System this school year. So to do so, we'll first provide a brief overview of relevant legislation and policy that guides the development of our district processes in this and other related areas. We'll also provide a summary of our enrollment plans for the 21-22 school year, highlighting both existing practices and also where any adjustments to our current processes may be made. And importantly, I will note, at this time, we do not anticipate the need for any change to current board policy in this particular area, and Ms. Reardon will talk more about that in just a moment. And then we'll, of course, close with an opportunity for any questions or dialogue the board wishes to engage in. We've got staff from several teams and departments across central services available to respond and contribute as needed. So with that introduction, at this time, I'll turn it over to Crystal Reardon. who will take us through the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share just a couple of updates that Mr. Cook and Superintendent Moore mentioned for this afternoon. We do, as Mr. Cook just mentioned, not anticipate needing any policy updates to be able to incorporate some of the options for families that we're going to provide the overview of this afternoon. And to highlight just very quickly what allows us to make these updates to our current practices are the legislative policies that you see on the screen, including legislation around admission requirements and legislation around powers and duties of the principal. Admission requirements at the legislative level do indicate that students that are grade appropriate or age appropriate, their point of entry into the public school system will be kindergarten. So students who enroll for the first time in the public schools who have not already accomplished grade level benchmarks through other means, such as private schools or other school settings, would enroll for the first time in kindergarten. However, the general statute that references powers and duties of the principal indicates that principals do have the authority to grade in place. And so we will cover this afternoon the practices and guidance that we currently provide to schools around how principals can grade in place students who might be age appropriate for kindergarten, but who can better be served in other grade levels. And just for reference, our policy in the Wake County Public School System is policy 4100 that aligns to the general statutes that you see listed on this slide. As we look at the next slide, this outlines our current practice and guidance to our elementary schools based on the legislation that you saw on the previous slides. So currently we indicate that students who are age appropriate for kindergarten, but who are enrolled in a non-public school are eligible to enroll in first grade for the following school year whenever they present to us to enroll if they have completed kindergarten successfully in a non-public school and have met their benchmarks, then they are eligible for first grade. So that is a current exception to kindergarten being the point of entry for public school. At the same time, students who are not age appropriate for kindergarten, again, this is our current guidance, who are not age appropriate for kindergarten, but who enroll in a non-public kindergarten will have a point of entry that is kindergarten when they enroll in the Wake County Public School System. If the parent feels that the student is ready for first grade, then the principal would follow the policy for whole grade advancement, which is documented in a separate board policy, and the details around whole grade advancement are provided to our principals in the guidance document for kindergarten entry. But this would be students who are not age appropriate and enroll in a non-public kindergarten. So again, these are our current practices. On the next slide, we're going to share our plans for the 21-22 school year only. So these are some exceptions that we feel are appropriate to make this year based on circumstances related to the pandemic and knowing that many families had to make different decisions because of circumstances beyond their control, and they may not have decided to enroll their students in the public school for kindergarten, but are interested in returning to the public school for first grade. So for the upcoming school year, students who are age appropriate for kindergarten this current year in 2021, but who are currently being homeschooled in kindergarten may enroll in first grade at the request of the parent without going through our current process of whole grade advancement. It is important to note that homeschool licenses in and of themselves are not issued for students under the age of 7 because the Division of Non-Public Ed doesn't see students under the age of 7 as falling under compulsory attendance. But there are families who have homeschool licenses for students who are older than age 7 and who have resources to be able to homeschool children. And so they are homeschooling their child with kindergarten benchmarks. It's just not necessarily being supervised at the state level. So that's why historically we have said that student would have a point of entry of kindergarten But again, because of circumstances that exist in our current environment, and because we know that some families just felt for purposes of safety and in some cases convenience that they needed to have their children at home this year, and they are working with them on kindergarten benchmarks in the home setting. So for those students who have indicated that they were homeschooled in kindergarten and the families have requested placement in first grade, then principals do have guidance this year to enroll those students in first grade. The principal and the family can make adjustments to grade places as needed based on data and observations once the students enroll. We don't want students or families to feel as though they are required to enroll in first grade as their point of entry. This is simply an option for families who feel as though first grade is the more appropriate setting for their student. So at the request of the parent, they can be enrolled in first grade. They may also choose to enroll in kindergarten to have the public school kindergarten experience. And again, principal and families may make adjustments as needed. On the next slide, we reference the students who are age appropriate for kindergarten during this school year, the 2021 school year, but who are not currently participating in any type of a kindergarten experience. Those students will still enroll in kindergarten as their point of entry for 21-22. Again, that's different than a family who presents and says that they are homeschooling their child in kindergarten. So students who are currently age appropriate but who are not participating in a kindergarten experience this year will enroll in kindergarten as their point of entry for 21-22. Parents who would wish to enroll their student directly in first grade would need to request through the principal and through the school the opportunity for whole grade advancement. And we certainly recognize that there are some time sensitivity issues around the process of whole grade advancement. We will work to be just as flexible as possible, but there are certainly some documentations that have to be in place to make sure that students are appropriately placed in a grade level where they can experience success and also meet their designated benchmarks. I think it's important to reference here, although it's not on the slide, to go back to our current practices. You know, we already have a practice in place for students who are age appropriate for kindergarten, but who might be in a charter school, a private school, or other school setting for kindergarten. And those students will enroll in first grade as their point of entry because they are completing a kindergarten experience this year. So any student who's not being homeschooled, but is completing an alternate kindergarten experience and they're age appropriate for kindergarten, we will still follow our prior policies and guidelines around entry into first grade. So as we sort of bring this to a close on the next slide, I want to invite any opportunity for dialogue and questions is certainly welcome. And as Mr. Cook mentioned earlier, we have quite a few folks on the call who have provided input and have been involved in our guidance around kindergarten entry for several years. And so we'll be able to extend any questions that you may have beyond the PowerPoints. So at this point, I'll invite questions.
All right. Any questions from board members at this time? Dr. Martin.
Not a particular question. I think you've put together a good strategy, but could you, both for us and for the public, clarify the definition of what age appropriate means? It could be, I think, defined somewhat differently depending on who the individual is looking at it. And there's probably a lower limit and an upper limit for age appropriate. So if you could just give clarity, that would be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Age appropriate for kindergarten meets the legislative requirements that a student turn 5 on or before August 31st of the year that they intend to enroll in kindergarten. Again, that's a legislative definition, not one that the Wake County Public School System has defined.
And if a student is significantly, I mean, is there a stage where the student is too old to enroll in kindergarten? The reason I'm thinking about that, particularly this year, is there may be children who might have been, families who might have wanted to wait in the prior year, and now because of COVID maybe waited an additional year. So is there an upper age limit?
That's a great question, Dr. Martin. Thank you. There's not a legislated upper age limit, but that's certainly where the powers and duties of the principal come into play. And a student who may not present to enroll in the public school system until the compulsory age of 7, the principal would certainly review the age of the student in addition to the preparedness for meeting grade level benchmarks and make a decision in collaboration with the family on the appropriate placement. In most cases such as that, the age would play a different factor than it would in a student who might have just sat out 1 year or might have a delayed birthday and looking for an early entry into kindergarten.
Thank you for that clarification.
Ms. Scott?
Thank you for that. A little curious about where our projections are and how that can potentially impact elementary schools. If we are anticipating that some people who might have pulled their children out are seeking that, even though they might be first grade age, but perhaps parents would like for their children to attend kindergarten for all the reasons kindergarten is great, but how this is the potential impact on our schools, especially with the K-3 class size mandate, as principals are trying to figure out the projections for next year and where they will need teachers, working with human resources on where changes may need to happen. I'm just curious how all of this sort of plays into that, because I know this is that time of year.
So I'm going to just start with addressing that, Ms. Scott, and thank you for that question. Just to indicate that is certainly the purpose of our bringing this forward this afternoon, is we want to, as quickly as possible, provide families with what their options will be when enrolling into the Wake County Public School System for the following school year, the 21-22 school year. And much of your question has to do with the data around students who may not have enrolled with us this year, but who we anticipate may return next year. And so I know Drew Cook and Glenn Carrozza are prepared to respond to that part of the question. But I did want to acknowledge the importance and the value of us quickly moving this information out to the public so that families know what their strategies will be and what their opportunities will be for the upcoming school year. So Mr. Cook and Mr. Carrozza, I'm going to open it up to you at this point.
Okay. So as we reviewed some of our numbers from last year, our allotment numbers, which is our projection for the ADM for the upcoming school year, we had a projection of 11,102 kindergartners for this current school year that we had projected. And according to the ADM for this current school year, 10,405 students had shown up. So you had a difference of, 697 students that didn't show up that we had expected according to our projected ADM. So as we look at that, parents will obviously have the choice to either promote their child to first grade based on what they've done throughout this school year. And then also parents have the choice to keep their child in kindergarten. And so I think as we look at buildings having the ability to house the children in the classes, well, our kindergarten classrooms actually allow us to have 18 children per classroom as opposed to first grade, which is 16. So I think that may be beneficial to us if we have students choose to remain in kindergarten as opposed to going to first grade, because it provides us more opportunities to seat more students. But ultimately, as we look at our long-range projections, we do take that into account as we look at capping recommendations and the number of students we expect to show up at the school. We do have plans in place to accommodate parent choices, whether it'll be kindergarten or first grade.
Thank you for that information. And sort of adding on to what Dr. Martin's question, for clarifying what this information means for the public, what are our plans from a communication standpoint in terms of a campaign around this time of year to share with parents, these are your options for the parents of children in this age group? these are your choices, these are your options. Which I would love to see something more than an article. But how can we get this information out? Because we all acknowledge that it can be very complicated and confusing, given some of the changes with this year.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Scott. I think, like so many other areas, first and foremost, the effort starts at the school level. And so prior to today, several weeks ago, actually, we've already begun communicating and socializing our intended plans with our schools. And so I think it starts there, obviously, but I also think, to your point, given kind of the bubble, if you want to call it that Glenn just described in the data and the numbers, then, obviously we've got some work to do in the coming weeks, especially right now as families, as you well know, are in the heart of decision-making season in terms of plans for next year, which is another reason, and rationale for kind of the extended flexibility in this particular area was so that families could kind of know with more certainty what they can plan for in terms of placement, at least for the one group of kids that Crystal shared for 21-22. And so I do think moving forward in the coming weeks, we will be making efforts to make sure that the information is getting out, and not just from the school level, but across the district as well, and all the available mediums that are out there.
Thank you for that, Mr. Cook. I know there probably are many families who may have been homeschooling their kindergartner or that are interested in returning, particularly as we keep our fingers crossed that things continue to trend positively for COVID impact, who would like their child to return to, and they may not be receiving those emails or the information from their base school. This is something they're going to need to hear in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott.
I don't have anything new. My questions were answered thanks to Dr. Martin and Ms. Scott. I do want to say thank you because I've received a lot of emails on this from parents wondering what the kindergarten or first grade experience will be for their child because they chose to keep them home or they're looking to put their kid into school this year. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you. Most of my questions were answered, but I do have something that's just percolating, and hopefully it doesn't become as much of an issue. But when you said you were already socializing it, it made me think about kind of what parameters are you also going to socialize around for parents who generally use the exception of asking for whole child advancement because their children's birthday is September 1st, versus weighing in to say, how they're going to determine if they say to us, well, I did do some kindergarten learning. I think that there's just the thought that once you start socializing something without a lot of context, because we do have a significant number of families who do the whole child placement for children's birthdays who shortly after the state cutoff, that I anticipate, well, let me say this. My fear is we will start socializing it and the context won't be easily translatable for parents who may see those as, oh, this is a great idea. I don't have to ask for the whole child exception because my child's birthday is September 1, versus having them officially in some type of homeschool kindergarten. So I don't know how you socialize that kind of clarity, but I think we have to put it out there that when we socialize stuff without real hard context, that then you will have people not understanding that this exception isn't really related to them if their children haven't been in some type of formal kindergarten, homeschooling, what have you. I don't know the answer.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler, I appreciate that. And I think one way, based on Dr. Martin's question earlier, and I think several of you had this question, one way we can help families understand that is that through legislation, we do not have the ability to make an exception about the age-appropriate date of August 31st. So in our communication outward, we'll work to be clear that families understand what age-appropriate means and that we include that is defined by state legislation as a cutoff of August 31st. And so I certainly hear what you're saying, and I think that is absolutely something that we need to work to clarify with families so that they understand that that the district itself does not have flexibility with a September 1st versus an August 31st date, but we do have parameters in place to help them with the most appropriate placement for their child.
So I think what I'm, so yes, and I think the real issue that needs to be socialized is that child would have had to be in formal kindergarten.
So I do think that there's always an FAQ and some examples that go with this type of campaign. I think the examples and questions that are part of the FAQ might need to be a little more distinct based on what's happened in the past year for the reasons and rationale for where students may have been. So.
Right. So let me give an example that would be helpful. If I have a kid whose birthday was September 1 and their daycare has a kindergarten, a pre-K kindergarten, which a lot of our private daycares do, and my child has been in that pre-K kindergarten class because of COVID, then the question is, do I then get to come to you and say, my child is eligible for not doing the whole child advancement because they were in a pre-K kindergarten class in their daycare? Because generally right now we require those people to still do a whole child. Trust me, I get lots of these calls. We require them currently to do the whole child advancement. Would we still be doing that, or does that private, because it's not really a kindergarten class, but a lot of kids, once they turn 5, right at the beginning of the school year in daycare, then they get moved to that pre-K kindergarten class in private daycare that we don't consider as kindergarten.
Ms. Johnson-Hauser, if I'm understanding your question correctly, if a student was not age appropriate for kindergarten based on state definition of age appropriate, and they were attending a kindergarten that was part of a daycare or even a private kindergarten that the family may have selected just for the kindergarten experience, and then they want to return and enroll in first grade. So again, through legislation, what we would say to that family is you first must enroll in the public school and be attending, and then they could request whole grade advancement. But whole grade advancement can't be guaranteed ahead of the student enrolling and attending. WGA, the whole grade advancement process, is specific to students who are enrolled and attending, but that would be the avenue for them becoming a first grader without having met that enrollment benchmark that is established through general statute, again, which would be turning 5 by August 31st of the date that you plan to enroll in kindergarten.
So I know that
I'm
it
not
drives
sure
you
if
crazy when we say, can you actually just answer a yes or no question? Like, I hear what you're saying, but writing that is not going to help these parents understand the actual yes or no answer. And
It looks like a decision tree to me at the top, where the birth date sort of drives which way you go.
perfect.
And
I
so
think that's a little bit more
the
understandable.
birth date before this drives you this way, birth date after this drives you this way.
Because otherwise, if we just keep saying that's what the legislation says, they're still going to be asking the question.
Dr. Martin.
Thank you. As we talk about socialization of this entry to school and kindergarten, I want to make sure we also recognize that thinking about grades has got to be more than just age. Legislation focus on age, right? Were you born before this date or not before this date? You know, I think every educator will tell you that how that foundation of education is built will impact the success later on. I see that at the university level. People who have tried to rush too fast to get through their classes usually don't have that depth of understanding that otherwise might have been built. So, and I'm afraid that that message is going to be exaggerated because we've heard so much talk about learning loss, and I think lots of parents feel like, you know, I'm not doing my job, my kid's at a deficit, and the deficit mindset makes you want to try to push your kid faster, a little bit further. And from an educator's perspective, I can just guarantee to get that sound foundation in kindergarten is worth way more than advancing them to first grade a year to overcome some loss. If you don't build a good foundation, it's really hard to catch up later. So as we socialize the kindergarten message, right, and I think the options for, you know, entering at first grade versus kindergarten, I think that's completely appropriate. But as we socialize this, let's really socialize that building that sound foundation, is way more important than doing it a year faster. Thank you. That's what I say, and that's why I'm making that comment right now, because there's going to be this pressure. The pressure has been the pressure has been building to advance. But the pressure from an educational standpoint and for the kids' health perspective is get that sound foundation, and that will help your kid in the long run.
All right, thank you for those comments. I do want to share a particular thought, and Mr. Cook touched on it, and then as staff, and as you've heard in the last 3 presentations, staff is planning for the 2021-22 school year, and so are obviously many of our parents. So we're moving forward and looking at planning for the school year next year. In the spirit of full transparency, I do want parents and those that are listening in to know that this board has not made a decision about what school will look like in the coming year with respect to the pandemic. Staff is operating on the assumption that we will be, and I think that a couple of the presenters have touched on it, we are operating on the assumption that we will be back full-time, face-to-face instruction without cohorts or what have you, but I do want to make it clear that that decision has not been made. There's been no recommendation coming from staff, but I know many parents are asking and wondering what will next year look like. So again, we are operating under the assumption that we will be back. There's been no guidance from Governor, DHS at this point. So I just want to make sure that parents are clear about that, and that, again, we are operating under that assumption, and we are hopeful that we will be back to some sense of normalcy, but we don't know, or no decision has been made at this time. More?
I would just agree that we are planning for a traditional opening of the school year with all of our schools, and of course would be responding to any action that's taken otherwise. And everyone that I've talked to, they know that we're the largest district in the state. We are planning for a traditional opening to the school year.
All right, thank you for that, and like I said, again, we are looking forward to that, and we will be making any decision or announcement around that at an appropriate time, but that is the assumption we are operating under at this time. All right, thank you, staff, for that information, and we'll continue to move forward. Our last item on the work session agenda, an update with regard to vaccination. So Superintendent Moore, I'll turn it over to you and Mr. Paul Coe.
So, this has moved a lot faster in a shorter period of time, just based on availability of vaccine, the partners that we've worked with, and of course, the waiting lists for groups 1 and 2 diminishing quite a bit. So I'll just turn it over to Paul Coe, who can give some highlights of where we are.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton and board members. I wanted to provide you some updates regarding our vaccination efforts from last week and what our outlook looks like for this week's efforts. And just to note, it's been an ever-changing process, and we are really grateful for our partners who are working closely with our district's team to ensure we provide vaccination opportunities to as many employees as possible. I'll start by outlining the initial process we used to identify employees to receive vaccination appointments last week. And so on February 19th, we sent the form to all staff to identify those employees who were interested in receiving the vaccination and those who self-attested to working in person regularly with students. And this form was sent via email. It was included in our employee news and also posted on Wake Connect. And it helped us collect the initial list of 10,000 WCPSS employees who were interested in getting vaccinated. And concurrently, Wake County Public Health, our hospital systems, Wake Med, UNC Rex, Duke Health, all opened up vaccination appointments for anyone for educators in Group 3 outside of WCPSS staff starting February 24th. So our employees could complete the WCPSS form, and they also had the opportunity to sign up for vaccinations through various non-WCPSS efforts. We thought this was a positive sign that the vaccines were accessible and available to all of our employees. And so last week, our district was able to hold multiple vaccination events specifically for WCPSS employees. And thanks to our partnerships with Wake County Public Health, Wake Med, Health Park Pharmacy, and Advanced Community Health. In addition, as this process is fluid, a few local pharmacies, a local Walgreens reached out to us with additional vaccination availability, so we were able to fill some additional slots with our employees. So before I get to the data, I wanted to thank Ryan Jury and Nicole Perry and their teams for being such great partners from Wake County Public Health. We also wanted to thank Amanda Edwards and Dr. Rashida Monroe and the Wake Med team, Steve Adkins from Health Park Pharmacy, Simone Bullock and Michelle Davis from Advanced Community Health for working so hard with us to ensure vaccines get into the arms of our employees. We're very grateful for their partnership in this effort. And so during this first week of vaccination events, out of the 10,000 that self-attested to interacting regularly with students, we were able to offer 5,500 employees appointments, and about 2,500 confirmed these appointments in the first week. Our hope is that the additional 2,000 or so employees had vaccine appointments already scheduled at other events and locations. However, even as of this week and today, we're continuing our efforts to survey our staff and ensure that they're aware of our vaccination efforts in the coming weeks. And on this slide, you'll see the number of doses that we provided to WCPSS employees at the events that we organized with our partners from February 24th through 27th. And again, this slide doesn't account for the employees who independently signed up for vaccination appointments through other county efforts, our local hospital systems, pharmacies, or healthcare providers. And so you'll see here that from our counts, we have an estimated total of about 2,530 doses that were a part of last week's efforts. And for this coming week, we have about 3,000 doses available that have been made available to our WCPSS employees through our district efforts. And we are continuing to explore additional vaccination opportunities that may be available to our employees through our local pharmacies and other clinics. In addition, we know there are currently appointments available for educators in Group 3 with our hospital systems, such as Wake Med, Duke Health, UNC Rex, along with our county efforts. We know that Wake County Public Health over the weekend and even as early as last Wednesday provided vaccination appointments to about 7,000 educators across the county, and not just WCPSS staff, for events this week. Our goal is to continue to work with our partners in the coming weeks to ensure that any WCPSS employee who wants a vaccine is able to receive it. We've also worked specifically with our custodial, transportation, and child nutrition services teams to make sure we are sharing this information more directly with staff members who may not regularly be on email. So thank you for the opportunity to share this update today. I'd also like to say a big thanks to the team who's helped coordinate our efforts, vaccine efforts so far. Dr. Matillo, Dr. Holland, Darren Levine from our HR team, Cecil Bell from our risk management team, Lisa Luton, Sarah Clark and her team from communications, Kelly Creech from health services, Linda Wilcox and Jill Touchberry from community services, Walt White and Matt Nielsen from technology services, and last but not least, Dr. Ashley Thompson, our central area superintendent. We're meeting daily to ensure our process optimizes the number of vaccines we can get to staff. And with that, I will pause here for any dialogue or questions.
Huge thank you. This is one of the strongest efforts that I've seen during the pandemic. Great work. Thank you.
Ms. Carter.
I just had a quick question. In order to get like a better feel for how many employees are getting the vaccine, even if it's away from the efforts and signups that you all have, do you have something in place to kind of touch base? I heard something from someone about a survey going out. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure.
Yes, so,
Go ahead, Paul.
oh yeah, thank you, Ms. Carter. So to make sure that we're tracking our efforts, in addition to the 10,000 that were surveyed that agreed to want a vaccine appointment, to make sure that we're stretching across all of our staff, we actually sent a survey out to all 23,000 staff today to make sure we're touching base with them about have they received the first dose of vaccine? Have they secured an appointment? Do they need support with making an appointment, or do they not want to provide that information? So we sent out a survey today that's broad reaching to all of our staff to get as much information as folks are willing to share. And so with that, we're going to hopefully organize additional efforts to meet the need.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mrs. Cash.
So the message that went out today to the teachers, there was a clinic, that was not on there. Is there any way to let them know the one clinic that's happening this Saturday at the church, Bayleaf?
Yeah, thanks, Mrs. Cash. I actually responded to your email a little late this afternoon, but if you can respond to that email, I could get in touch with those folks and make our staff aware of that event.
I think we have, because this is such an area of focus right now, and we've got this window and this desire and lots of, social media and conversation about it. We have found a couple of places here and there where folks have organized stuff, but they didn't come through us with it necessarily. So I think what Paul is asking is if anybody is aware of something that hasn't come through us, if we can just connect with the person who's in charge of that effort, we will make sure that we're messaging to our folks.
So are you asking the pharmacists to not only let the Wake County Health Department know, because they set them up as a strike team, they need to also let you know, because they were set up to vaccinate the teachers only at Bayleaf Baptist?
Yeah, that has not come
That
to
doesn't
us
come from the health department to you?
at this point.
Okay.
And Paul, we have not gotten that, right?
No, so I think when there's independent pharmacies that have set up their own teams with the county, it's best if they at least reach out to me, Mrs. Cash, so that I can at least coordinate the efforts and make our staff aware.
Okay, I guess I thought the health department, the Wake County offices was doing that. I'll let them know.
Ms. Johnson-Hosler.
Leave it to me to ask the impossible question. So do you all have, and please, Mr. Coe's always very patient, so I know he'll be patient with this one as well. So very similar to the one that Ms. Cash just mentioned, it's common that these pop up at the last minute. So do we have a way that we've notified educators who may like to take a break from their email on Saturday morning? Have we come up with a strategy, or is there a strategy that on Friday, if there are going to be 100 vaccines at Wake Chapel, I just use that because that's my church, then do we have a way to actually get that information out to educators quickly who are on our list, or who, I know that that's an impossible question, but we also know that it's now become a reality that short-term turnaround happens.
Yes, thanks for that question, Ms. Johnson-Hosler. So yes, we've already gone through that as of last week. What we do is when there's some notice, like for example, Mrs. Kushner may send me an email and say a specific pharmacy has availability of vaccine doses, and what we do from there is actually connect that contact with our area superintendents, who will let all the schools in that area know that there's vaccine availability. And through our principals, we will get our folks signed up who are interested for those last minute events. And just know that those do happen just in real time throughout the course of the week. And we've, going through this first week of learning about how to set up vaccine processes. That's one of the ways in which we've set up ways to get as many people signed up as possible through our schools and our area superintendents.
Thank you. You all are getting real good at anticipating my questions.
All right. Any other additional questions from board members regarding the update on vaccinations? All right, seeing none, just want to again commend staff for their efforts and your work with with Wake County and all the other partners who are providing vaccinations and just getting the word out. It's been a massive effort and undertaking. I was over at the County Commons building last week on the 24th when the first day was available, and to just see both the excitement, but also the how smooth that operation flowed and got people in and out is been incredible. I know that the county is very excited about the numbers and seeing how the capacity as well as the supply is starting to ramp up, and so it is not unreasonable to think or expect that somewhere in the next month or so that we could really be have all employees here in the system vaccinated, at least those that want it. And that just a week or two ago, that sounded like it was impossible, but now very, very realistic that all employees could be vaccinated in another 30, 45 days or so. So that's incredibly amazing to hear. Ms. Kushner.
I'm sorry, you made me think of a question, Chair Sutton. Do we have an update on when students would begin to be vaccinated? Is there any guidance on that?
Ms. Kushner, I think we have folks in the county and folks like Kelly Creech who are thinking about that, but we would need to talk more and come up with some concrete plans. But that is not off our radar. It is on our radar for upcoming groups, whether that's in groups 4 or 5.
Thank you.
I think again, just sort of as a caveat for this, as we prepare for that as an option, it'll first have to be an option, and it's not yet. So.
Well, just to recognize, it's not that we haven't gotten people done yet. The vaccine is not yet approved for children.
Correct, yes.
All right, so again, thank you for that. That wraps up our agenda for the work session this afternoon. So thank you to all of those that tuned in, and this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you. We'll get ready to transition at 5:30 to our regular. Before I do adjourn, if I can entertain, Ms. Mahaffey, if you could grab the closed session agenda, if I can entertain a motion to go into closed session.
All right. Chair Sutton, I make a motion to go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318.11A1, A3, and A6, to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11A3, Ronaldo Oliveira versus Wake County Board of Education et al., U.S. District Court, Eastern District of NC, case number 5:21-CV-34-D, and to consider confidential student information protected under GS 115C-402 and the Family Educational and Privacy Rights Act 20 U.S.C. 1232G.
Is there a second? Got a motion from Ms. Mahaffey, second from Mr. Hagerty to go into closed session per the items just stated and printed on the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We now stand in closed session. Thank you for joining us today, and we now adjourn.
Does this work? Yeah, so Marlo has set up the closed session, and we've got Wade and Glenn on standby if we can knock those two items out, if you're interested. So who do you want to start with?
Let's start with AJ.